Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you through the most important article for the civil service examination from today's newspaper. The articles that we will take up for today's discussion from the Hindu, dated 9th May 2020, has been tabulated in front of you. The time stamping for the same has been provided in the description section. This news from page number 1 highlights the National Green Tribunal judgment that came yesterday. NGT has asked LG Polymers to deposit a sum of rupees 50 crore. This is the initial amount that the company has to deposit, and the final payment of compensation will be decided later on. In the meanwhile, NGT has constituted a 5-member fact-finding committee. This committee is headed by a former High Court judge of Andhra Pradesh. The committee will get into the detail. It will find the cause of the failure, persons and authorities responsible for lapse, the extent of damage to life, property, environment, and steps to be taken for compensation of victims and restoration of environment, and the cost that will be involved in it. And once this committee gives the report, then the NGT will be in better position to seek the final compensation from LG Polymers. NGT in its yesterday's judgment has made certain observations, and those observations are important for you to understand for the mains examination. First of all, NGT has invoked the principle of a strict liability. This principle of a strict liability does not come from any legislation. However, this is an important principle in legal jurisprudence to deal with damage caused to health and environment by hazardous companies. The principle of a strict liability imposes legal responsibility for damages or injuries caused by hazardous substances in a person's or enterprise's premise, even if the person or enterprise did not act with fault or negligence. This is an important principle for socio-environmental justice, and it was formulated by the English court in 1868, and it has been borrowed from England and used globally in the present time. So under strict liability, you have to take the legal responsibility of hazardous substances coming out from your premise, irrespective of how it has happened. For example, suppose there was a manufacturing equipment defect. Now you can't pass on the buck to the manufacturer of that equipment saying that he is liable. No. If something is happening in your premise, you will be held responsible even if the fault was not yours. So that was the idea of a strict liability. However, even though it sounds very strict, it is not so strict in practical sense because many exemptions are given under this principle. For example, if there was an accident on the site, the fault was of the third party, or the accident has happened because of a natural disaster by an act of God, then the concerned company will not be held liable to compensate for the loss of health, property and environment. But many legal observers has criticized this move of NGT to invoke strict liability. In their opinion, what should have been invoked was absolute liability instead of strict liability. Absolute liability was developed by Supreme Court of India in MC Mehta versus Union of India case 1986. This judgment was given in the backdrop of Bhopal gas tragedy that happened in 1984. And the court was in strict mood of imposing the liability. And celebrated Chief Justice of India, Justice P.N. Bhagwati, gave the judgment saying that no exceptions of a strict liability shall apply in certain cases. This principle of absolute liability ensures that people or enterprise who cause the damage will have unlimited liability to compensate victims adequately. And this principle also is not backed by any legislation. Rather, this has been linked to right to life under Article 21 of our Constitution. Supreme Court held that a company in a hazardous industry cannot claim any exemption. It has to mandatorily pay compensation whether or not the disaster was caused by its negligence. The court said a hazardous enterprise has absolute non-delegable duty to the community. So the long and short of it is this: absolute liability is a strict liability minus the exemptions given under the strict liability. And some are of the opinion that National Green Tribunal should have rather invoked absolute liability principle instead of a strict liability principle. The second observation that National Green Tribunal has made in yesterday's judgment is styrene has been defined as a hazardous chemical under Manufacture, Storage and Import of Hazardous Chemicals Amendment Rules. And by virtue of this, there has to be on-site and off-site emergency plan in place. And prima facie, it appears that there were no on-site or off-site emergency plan. For the prelims examination and also in general, you should be aware of the basic chemistry of styrene. Styrene, first of all, is this vinyl molecule on benzene. You must be familiar with this benzene molecule. When there is a C double bond C on benzene, that is actually styrene. This is a styrene molecule. And as you can see, this is quite heavy. And this will not exist as a gas. Everywhere in newspaper, you're reading styrene gas, styrene gas, styrene gas. But styrene is a dense liquid at room temperature. The boiling point of styrene is 145 degrees Celsius. So only when there is an explosion, styrene can come out as a gas. Under normal condition or even at some elevated temperature, that will still be a liquid. But however, the problem with styrene is that it starts to polymerize, forming polystyrene. And a long chain like this starts to develop. This is polystyrene resulting from self-polymerization of styrene molecules. Polystyrene is used in the plastic industry. To stop this chain polymerization, styrene has to be stored at low temperature. Temperature has to be continuously monitored and any exposure to light or heat has to be stopped because that will result in polymerization. And once polymerization reaction starts exploding, then heat will be evolved. An uncontrolled amount of heat may even burst the tank in which it is stored. And that is why side by side the tank of styrene, there is a tank of inhibitors. And that inhibitors inhibit this chain reaction, stop this reaction from happening, and do not allow the temperature to increase uncontrollably. A statement from LG Polymers said that stagnation because there was lockdown and the company was shut for 40 days. It was only opened 2 days before this incident happened. So there was a stagnation in the tank. And because of stagnation and changes in temperature inside the storage tank, there could have been auto-polymerization and that could have caused the vaporization of polystyrene. But as I have told you before, the boiling point of polystyrene is 145 degrees Celsius. So even suppose the temperature of the tank in which the styrene was stored got elevated and vaporization of the styrene happened, but still it will not spread to region of radius of around 4 to 5 km as has been claimed. So many of the scientists and professors are puzzled as to what has happened because styrene even in vapor state forms dense fume and it does not expand into the vicinity like other gases like nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen or methane which have considerable lower molecular weight. What exactly has happened that will come out in the fact-finding committee's report, but for now something has happened and some poisonous gas, if not styrene then combination of styrene and some other gas has leaked out of the facility, that is for sure. And it is also very clear that emergency plans were not in place, so the company must be held liable. A third important observation that NGT made in its judgment is that statutory authorities responsible for authorizing and regulating such activities will also be held accountable if any lapse were to be found on their part. There are two facts that people have pointed out already. First is this company was locked down for 40 days and only 2 days before the incident it was opened. And to open up the company, permission was to be taken and the permission was given over phone. And factory inspector or pollution control board did not inspect the plant. Secondly, LG Polymers handed critical operations to untrained casual workers. And as a matter of fact, there are only 50 permanent workers, while contract and casual workers numbers around 350. And on the day of the incident, there were only 15 workers on site and all of them were casual staff with no experience in restarting of the polymer plant or dealing with emergency situation like this. So it appears as though a lot of question has to be answered by the LG polymer and it has been under considerable lapse. The situation is quite similar to Bhopal gas tragedy, in which the lapse was also there on the part of the company. But it has to be made sure that the consequence of the tragedy is not the same this time. The company must be held liable and adequate compensation must be paid to the victims. This is the editorial article from page number 6, Contempt for Labor. See, as COVID-19 pandemic will move into its latter stage, more and more problem and conflict will arise. Initially, we were looking at it from the perspective of a health emergency, and the focus was to formulate vaccines and medications, find the RNA sequence of the virus, get into international collaboration, set down the norms for social distancing, decide on the lockdown, and things like that. In the middle stage, we were talking about monetary and fiscal stimulus. So we talked in detail in many DNS the steps taken by the RBI and the government to give stimulus to the economy. We move to the next stage of economy along with the next stage of the epidemic. And in this stage, the implementation of the fiscal stimulus package will be dealt with. The economic principles, norms, and regulations will be changed, either by forming new rules and regulations or tweaking on the previous one. In the coming days, you will be getting to read many articles regarding changes in the labor laws, industries, and legislations like Factories Act. One of the editorial of the Hindu in today's newspaper is already on the issue. See, recently Madhya Pradesh cabinet has decided to allow its business and industry to operate without many of the regulations of Factories Act 1948. For instance, they are going to allow the factories to take labor from the workers of 12 hours instead of maximum 8 hours as laid down by the law. Uttar Pradesh cabinet already has approved an ordinance suspending for 3 years all labor laws except for the critical ones. For example, the provisions of labor laws relating to abolition of child and bonded labor, issues of women employees, and issues related to payment of wages, compensation for accidents that happened on duty. Similarly, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Punjab, they all have extended the working hours to 12 hours. This editorial article raises a concern that suspension of the provisions of the Factories Act 1948 may result in nullification of the duties enforced upon the factories, industries, and businesses by the law. For example, the duty to provide drinking water, first aid boxes, protective equipments, cleanliness, ventilation, lighting, canteens, restroom, creches. These facilities may be curtailed or altogether done away with to cut down the cost. The human suffering in the lower strata of the society has been very high during this pandemic. The pain of the migrant laborers, thousands and thousands of miles they are traveling on foot. Their food security is threatened. Their survival has been put to risk. In this context, if such a drastic measure is taken and the interest of the worker will be compromised, then a huge question will be raised upon the inclusive nature of Indian economy. And already few organizations have started to ring the alarm bell that poverty may actually increase after the pandemic and increase to considerable level after many decades. So from today itself, we may be looking at a very grim picture of tomorrow. A letter has been written by some opposition parties to the president alleging that the step taken by the state government in diluting the labor law provision is unconstitutional. Whether these are unconstitutional or constitutional, that will be decided by the Supreme Court. And in all likelihood, in the coming days, a petition will be filed in the Supreme Court on the issue. But for now, I will just like to bring your attention to Section 5 of the Factories Act 1948. Section 5 of the Act permits exemption from its provision for a period of 3 months at a time. And if the state government feels fit, it can suspend some or all the provisions in case of a public emergency. But this public emergency has been clarified in the Act itself and it has very narrow definition. This is the reproduction of Section 5 of the Act. It is titled as Power to Exempt During Public Emergency. And it says, in case of public emergency, the state government can exempt any factory from all or any of the provision of the Act, except Section 67. Section 67 is regarding ban on child labor. And the Act further says that the suspension cannot be for more than 3 months at a time. The explanation of Section 5 says, for the purpose of this section, public emergency means a grave emergency, whereby the security of India or of any part of the territory thereof is threatened, whether by war or external aggression or internal disturbance. There is no mention of natural disaster, there is no mention of epidemic. So, how this is going to be interpreted, I don't know. But in all likelihood, this battle is going to be fought legally, and Supreme Court finally will have to give a clarification on this. So keep an eye on this, and anyways, many articles are going to come in the coming days on this particular issue. This article from page number 6 is on geo-strategic issue concerning India, China and United States. The author of the article, Shiv Shankar Menon, he has highlighted two things in the article: the present global scenario and how should India be taking decision on foreign policy front to cope with this hinge moment that the author is referring to. In fact, the title of the article is Shaping India's Response in a Global Hinge Moment. The hinge moment is the present moment as per the author, during which there is power transition from United States to China. And although this is going to take a long time, but still preparedness on foreign policy front is extremely important, because as per the author, prosperity of a nation is dependent upon the choices made on foreign policy front. Presently, the picture is like this. USA is receding from the global affair, and China is expanding and indulging into adventurism. For example, United States has pulled out of Paris deal. United States also has pulled out of Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action or Iran nuclear deal. United States is also pulling out of Afghanistan, and as per the author, certainly it is no longer the upholder of international order, economic or political, and seems to be tired of this role. And the natural successor of the role being played by USA presently would be China. And expansion and adventurism of China has been seen in last decade. China has seen double-digit growth for 2 decades, and the economic prosperity has been well utilized by China in expanding its influence in Asia and beyond. In many of the DNS, specifically we have discussed the adventurism of China in South China Sea. There are also issues concerning China-Pakistan economic corridor, which challenges the sovereignty of India over Jammu and Kashmir. China has utilized its Belt and Road Initiative to reach up till Eastern Europe and Africa. China is also trying to challenge the hegemony of World Bank and Asian Development Bank through initiatives like Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. China has also placed its first overseas military base at Djibouti. China has many strategic ports like Godar, Hambantota, Yakpiu in Myanmar. And you can further keep on increasing the list that will show how China has shown expansion and adventurism in recent time. The author is of the opinion, and very rightly so, that there is going to be power transition from United States of America to the People's Republic of China. So in this context, what should be India's response? In strategic affairs, basically there are two options. One is to form an alliance with the perceived enemy, in this case China, and the natural alliance would be with United States of America. In this regard, we are already advancing. For example, we have 2+2 dialogue of foreign and defense minister between the two nations. We also have initiated recently India-US tri-service military exercise. And India has been an integral part of Indo-pacific narrative of United States through the conception of Quad. Bilateral engagement between the two nations has grown in the recent time. One school of thought is this should be elevated, and through gradual progression we should finally reach to comprehensive strategic global partnership. This will be a close alliance with United States in line with Japan and Australia. So either we go this line or we follow strategic autonomy. Without being in dangerously close alliance with any bloc, we follow autonomy in making strategic decisions. For instance, we can develop close relationship with US and still cooperate with China on certain fronts like BRICS, BASIC, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, etc. Author is of the opinion that India is true resilient of a nation. India should not take refuge in any strong alliance. India must have an independent strategic decision making ability. And the author bats for this that India should follow strategic autonomy. So the question is, if we are going to follow strategic autonomy, what will be the strategy to engage with China? Or to say, how are we going to tackle the Chinese dragon? The author puts out certain ideas, but here we are going to elaborate them by citing examples and instances from the recent past. The author says that bilateral engagement with China must move on. We already have deepening bilateral engagement with China, and that should be moving up. For instance, way back in 2010, India and China established India-China Strategic Economic Dialogue. Recently, second India-China informal summit was held in Mamallapuram. The first one was held in Wuhan. New platform for cooperation between India and China has been started recently. For instance, India-China Trade and Investment Cooperation Forum, India-China Drug Regulation Forum. So the argument is that the bilateral engagement must be deepened between the nation, because it's a very basic geostrategic principle that if the bilateral engagement between the two nations is very high, then the non-cooperation cost is very high. And this is one reason that despite the problem of border issue, despite the huge issue of China-Pakistan economic corridor, despite the shooting at the borders, despite the allegation that China has been encouraging insurgency in northeastern India, despite the allegation that China is trying to block the water of Brahmaputra by building big dams, the relationship between India and China has never gone too low. There has never been diplomatic standoff between India and China for long, even during the Doklam issue, because the trade between India and China has touched $90 billion. And the bilateral engagement is so deep that it is impossible to reverse it. So India must keep on doing this and further striking cordial relationship in the neighborhood so that the region stays multipolar and it's very difficult for China to misbehave, or it should be forced to act responsibly. For instance, India can use the platform like East Asia Summit, ASEAN Plus 6, in which apart from ASEAN, there is Japan, South Korea, China, India, Australia, and New Zealand. India can also possibly form a trilateral alliance among India, Indonesia, and Australia. We have talked about this in one of the previous DNS. What India can also do is to use the institutions of United Nations to enforce rule of law and fair play in the region. For instance, India can use United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea to enforce right of passage through the sea lanes. What cannot be done individually can be done institutionally. And there is plethora of other things you can keep adding into this category. Then author has also pointed out that India must utilize the Cold War between United States and China. News have started to come in that United States will pose restriction on Chinese investment. United States already have created a lot of tariff barrier for Chinese product. This can be seen as an opportunity for India, and India can increase trade with both the nations. So this is what the Geo-strategic action plan of India for Indo-Pacific region can look like. Now let us see the summary of the news that we have seen so far, and here we'll also take up some smaller news in the newspaper that will be important for the prelims exam. There is one news that $500 million loan from AIIB is going to come to India. UPSC already has asked question in mains and prelims last year regarding Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And you would already be knowing this, but just for a quick refresher, it's a multilateral development bank that was established in 2015, and the purpose was to act as one of the financing arm of China's Belt and Road Initiative. As is in the name, the aim is to boost infrastructure connectivity, but this is not limited to Asia. This can finance infrastructure project anywhere in the world because the membership is open for everyone. However, the members are divided into two groups. One is regional and the other is non-regional. Regional members are coming from Asia and Oceania, as has been defined within United Nations, and non-regional members are from rest of the world. The headquarters is in Beijing. You should remember the headquarters of New Development Bank, the BRIC Bank, is in Shanghai. China is the largest contributor and India is the second largest contributor to the bank. There is also a small news in today's newspaper that GCC attempt to limit the outbreak of COVID-19, but the detail of that is not provided. As such, the step taken by GCC nation internally, what they are doing to fight this pandemic, that is not much of importance for us. But you should know that Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC countries, comprise 6 Sunni nations in the Gulf, and it was formed to counter the influence of Shia Iran. The nations are Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Oman, as you can see in this map. There is also a mention in today's newspaper regarding Japan and India Vision 2025, Special Strategic and Global Partnership. The news is that the Defense Minister of India and Japan have agreed to work together and with other countries to deal with challenges post COVID-19. But what the modality will be and the detail is yet to be formulated, but the platform to be used for this cooperation will be the one that was announced in 2015, and that platform is Japan and India Vision 2025 Special Strategic and Global Partnership. Then on page number 1 in today's newspaper, there's mention of Vande Bharat Mission. First of all, you should not confuse this with Vande Bharat Express. Vande Bharat Express is semi-high speed train. This is a mission. This basically refers to the massive evacuation operation carried out by India to rescue many of the Indians stranded in different parts of the world due to coronavirus pandemic. And Air Force and Indian Navy is participating in this mission. Finance Minister has opened Rupee-Dollar derivative trading at Gift City. Gift City, you would know, Gujarat International Finance Tech City. And Gift City is first operational smart city of India, and more importantly, it is first international financial service center in India. Previously, we have already seen a landmark judgment by Supreme Court of India, MC Mehta versus Union of India. This has not only revolutionized the environmental law in India, but across the nation. The judgment enlarged the scope and ambit of Article 21 and Article 32. To include the right to healthy and pollution-free environment. And it is in this judgment that Supreme Court formulated the principle of absolute liability. Absolute liability is basically strict liability minus the exemptions given in the strict liability. Meaning, if there is a loss to the environment, health and property, due to poisonous substance emanating from a facility, then the owner of that enterprise will be held absolutely responsible even though there would be no negligence or fault of his own. We also saw that Section 5 of Indian Factory Act 1948 permits exemptions from its provision for 3 months at a time. However, this exemption can be given only during public emergency, and public emergency have been very narrowly defined in the explanation to Section 5. Public emergency is limited to threat to security due to war, external aggression, or internal disturbance. We also saw that when styrene polymerizes, it forms polystyrene, and polystyrene is used to make plastic. It is heavily used in the plastic industry across the sectors, in automobile, in medical, in packaging, you name it. The reason is that it is very clear and transparent plastic. So all the syringes used in the medical field, they are of polystyrene. It is also used in the food industry because it is inert. It does not react easily. It is cost effective and also long lasting. So it is also one of the most widely used plastic in the packaging industry. With this, we have come to the end of the discussion for today. Now we will take up question for the day. First, let's see the answer to yesterday's question of the day. The question was, which of the following statement about legislative councils in India is correct? The statements given were, the powers of legislative council are at par with the power of legislative assembly, which is absolutely incorrect because legislative council cannot reject a bill. Legislative council can at most stall a bill for 14 days, and after that, even if the bill is not passed or bill has not been discussed with the council, it will be deemed to be passed with the council. So the power of legislative council is considerably curtailed. So first option is gone. We are left with option B and C. Now we have to look at statement 3 if that is true or false. Statement 3 is the members of legislative council are elected for a period of 5 years. Incorrect again. because they are elected for a period of 6 years, just like Rajya Sabha members, and 1/3 of the members of Legislative Council retire every year. So answer will be option B. Now let's see question for today. The principle of absolute liability, as per which the people who cause damage will have unlimited liability to compensate victims adequately, is the innovation of Indian Supreme Court. And statement 2 is Environment Protection Act 1986 has the provision of compensation for environmental damage by private companies. 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, none of the above. With this, we have come to the end of the session. I would request you to attempt the question of DNS so that you would be able to judge what you have gained in last 30 minutes. Goodbye, take care, see you next time.